Well, in a case sure to spark renewed debate over the right to die, a man in Belgium who was thought to be in a coma for 23 years has actually been awake and aware of his surroundings the entire time. The discovery came after new high-tech scans showed Ron Hubin's brain was functioning almost completely normally, and via computer, he described the moment that he first realized he was paralyzed, saying, quote, "I screamed, but no one could hear. I became a witness to my own suffering as doctors and nurses tried to speak with me until they gave up all hope." My guest is Dr. Michael DeGiorgia. He's the director of neurocritical care at University Hospital's Case Medical Center in Cleveland, and Dr. Art Kaplan, medical ethicist at the University of Pennsylvania. Good to see both of you. And thanks for being with me. And Dr. DeGiorgia, I'd like to start with you because I think these are always difficult to understand. How a person can look like he or she isn't sort of there, but the brain is functioning on its own level. And I know that I'm asking you to make some conjecture here, but put the pieces together for me as best you can.
Well, I mean, it's hard to comment specifically on this case without knowing all the details, but I think that this kind of thing can happen, and I think it does happen more than people realize. The problem is that at the bedside, in order for doctors to determine whether somebody is awake, you ask them to follow commands. Blink your eyes, show me two fingers, that kind of thing. And if they don't do that, that's pretty much all we can do. And the problem is that patients can be completely paralyzed, literally not being able to move a muscle, but be awake on the inside and not being able to get that information out. And that's what's called locked-in syndrome, which is completely different from being in a coma or being in a vegetative state. But it's challenging for us at the bedside to determine those conditions.
And Art, one of the things I've always said to my medical students and residents is this is exactly why you don't talk over somebody. Anything that's personal, anything that's describing the patient has to be out of earshot because you don't know if that patient can hear you.
That's a very important point, Nancy. You don't want to treat the person in that bit as if they're not there. I think it's always important, too, to try to communicate with them periodically to see if any type of ability to raise an eyebrow or some form of communication has been restored. I was going to say, one of the things that people worry about when they see these kinds of cases is, am I giving up too soon on my relatives? And I think it's important to understand locked-in syndrome, very tough to diagnose, but when we have the ability to do extensive neurological testing on someone, it is possible to see that they've suffered so much brain damage that recovery is unlikely.
Michael, when you have someone, and we all know that it's easy to emotionally walk away from a patient after they've been in a certain state for a long time, but at what point do you say neurologically, I will do a scan, I'll keep checking things on people who have been locked in for a long period of time, especially when, frankly, we're talking about how best to spend health care dollars?
I think that's a tough call, and I'm not sure how best to answer that. I mean, I think that one of the things that we have learned over the past couple of years is that the brain can be more resilient than we used to think, and that patients can recover to some degree now. It can sometimes take years, and that's why you hear every now and then of one of these awakenings. But certainly one should be very careful about giving up hope early on within the first couple of weeks after a trauma. We need to be very cautious about writing people off in that early phase.
Art, with the National Debates Center, they always do so around, cases that are stuck in our minds. I'm reminded of Karen Ann Quinlan, who fell into a coma in 1975, died after she was after a prolonged court battle. The famous Terry Schiavo case in 2005, where I thought there were senators who really overstepped their bounds. How do we start to talk about death and dying and keep politics out of what should be very personalized medical decisions?
Well, we have to keep the decision-making, I think, close to home, at the bedside, between the doctors, between the family members, obviously if the patient can communicate. Taking it up to Congress, into courts even is a bit tricky. I won't say never go to court, but taking it to Washington, horrible idea. Too far away, no experience with these cases. It's also important for us to take responsibility. we have to let our loved ones know what we want. You know, some people may say, being in a locked-in state, I don't want to be that way. Even if I'm conscious and I can understand, I don't want to be trapped that way. If that's all that can happen to me, I don't want to do that. Others may say, I can tough that out, I'd like to get treatment. There's no single right answer, but each one of us has to tell our family members, what do we want, and we have to pick a decision maker if we can't communicate.
A great reminder that we are all mortal, and death and dying is
Yes,
a normal part of the
indeed.
the human syndrome, if you will. Doctors DeGiorgio and Kaplan, thanks so much, Michael and Art. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks.